A man finds a leopard cub swimming 130 miles offshore. How could that even be possible? At first, it looks like a miracle rescue. But then, everything changes. Because the cub isn't just lost, it was put there. On Purpose.now. What started as an unbelievable discovery spirals into a dangerous fight against a powerful enemy. A man willing to risk lives, and even kill, just to protect his secrets. The rescuers are trapped in a storm of lies, betrayal, and life or death choices. Why was this helpless animal left to die so far from land? What terrible truth is hiding beneath the surface? And how far will one man go to save the cub and the people he loves when the ocean itself becomes the battlefield? You being here is a reminder. The quiet acts of love and kindness still matter. If you hold space for compassion, you're already part of this community. The dawn light painted streaks of pink and orange across the Gulf of Mexico as Nate Calder guided his charter boat through the gentle swells. The salty breeze whipped at his weathered face while his experienced eyes scanned the horizon. Beside him, Bernie Sloan, his loyal deckhand, was checking their fishing gear for the morning's scheduled trip. "Cap, what's that out there?" Bernie's gruff voice cut through the engine's steady hum. He pointed towards something bobbing in the waves about 50 yards ahead. Nate squinted against the morning glare. "Not sure. Looks too big for a bird." He adjusted course slightly, curiosity getting the better of him. As they drew closer, his heart nearly stopped. Good Lord. There, 130 miles from the nearest shoreline, a leopard cub thrashed weakly in the water. Its spotted coat was soaked dark, its small head barely above the surface as it clung to what looked like pieces of a torn harness with attached flotation. "Bernie, grab the net," Nate called out, already reducing speed. His mind raced. How in the world had a leopard cub ended up this far offshore? Bernie scrambled to position himself at the rail with their largest landing net. The cub's eyes were wide with terror, its breathing rapid and shallow. As they maneuvered alongside, Nate could see it was exhausted from fighting the waves. "Easy now," Nate murmured, more to steady himself than the frightened animal. "Bernie, nice and slow." With practiced skill, they managed to scoop the cub into the net. It barely struggled as Bernie lifted it aboard, laying it gently on the deck. The cub immediately tried to scramble away, but its legs were too weak. "Poor thing's half drowned," Bernie said, keeping his distance as the cub huddled against the gunwale. "What kind of mess have we gotten ourselves into, Cap?" Before Nate could answer, a deep horn blast echoed across the water. A massive white yacht appeared as if from nowhere, cutting through the morning haze. The vessel was easily over 100 feet long, its pristine hull gleaming in the sunrise. The Perigee. Nate read the name off the bow, his stomach tightening. He knew that boat. Everyone in these waters did. It belonged to Harlan Whitcomb, the shipping magnate whose name graced half the buildings in the nearest port. The yacht drew alongside, dwarfing Nate's modest charter boat. A tall figure in crisp white linen appeared at the rail above them. Harlan Whitcomb's commanding presence seemed to fill the space between the vessels. "Captain Calder," Whitcomb called down, his voice smooth as aged bourbon. "I see you found our missing cargo. We'll take it from here." Nate felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. Something wasn't right about this situation. "Your cargo, Mr. Whitcomb?" "This is a live animal, a leopard cub." "Care to explain how it ended up floating in the middle of the Gulf?" "Unfortunate. Accident during transport," Whitcomb replied, his smile never wavering. "But it's worked out perfectly. We have a film crew aboard. This will make an excellent rescue story. Hand over the cub, and we'll make it worth your while." Bernie shifted uncomfortably beside Nate, who stared up at Whitcomb's perfectly composed face. The cub whimpered softly behind them. "No," Nate said firmly. "This animal needs medical attention. Not a photo op. I'm taking it to shore. Whitcomb's smile hardened. I don't think you understand, Captain. That cub is my property. Hand it over. Now. Instead of responding, Nate moved to the helm. The engines roared to life as he pushed the throttle forward. His boat leaped forward, sending spray across the yacht's gleaming hull. You're making a mistake, Calder. Whitcomb's shout followed them across the waves. Cap, Bernie said quietly once they'd put some distance between them and the yacht. You know Whitcomb isn't the kind of man you want as an enemy. No, Nate agreed, his jaw set as he guided them toward shore. But some things are worth fighting. Ethel. He glanced back at the trembling cub, knowing in his gut that he'd just started something bigger than he could imagine. As the coast grew larger on the horizon, Nate's hands trembled slightly on the wheel. The Leopard Cub had curled into a corner of the deck, wrapped in towels Bernie had found below. The encounter with Whitcomb replayed in his mind, each detail more troubling than the last. Bernie, take the helm, Nate called out. I need to make a call. In the cabin, he stared at his phone for a long moment before dialing. 3 rings, then a familiar voice answered. Federal Wildlife Services, Dr. Fitch speaking. Nate cleared his throat. Laurel, it's me. I need your help. A pause. Nate? This is unexpected. I've got a situation. A leopard cub rescued from the Gulf, 130 miles out. Can you meet me at Miller's old fueling pier, Miller's? Her voice sharpened with concern. That place has been closed for years. Exactly. We need privacy. Please, Laurel. This is important. Another pause. Longer this time. I'll be there in 45 minutes. The hidden pier was exactly as Nate remembered it. Weathered wood and rusted fuel tanks, half hidden by overgrown mangroves. Perfect for staying out of sight. As they tied up, a government vehicle pulled onto the abandoned lot above. Laurel looked the same as she had 2 years ago. Practical khaki uniform. Sun-streaked hair pulled back. Sharp eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes widened when she saw the cub. My God, she breathed, kneeling beside the animal. What happened out there? Nate explained the rescue and the confrontation with Whitcomb while Laurel examined the cub. Her hands moved with gentle efficiency, checking vitals and condition. The cub, still exhausted, offered little resistance. Male, probably 4 months. Old, she reported. Dehydrated but otherwise healthy. Wait. Her fingers found something at the scruff of the neck. There's a microchip. She pulled out a handheld scanner, running it over the area. Numbers appeared on the small screen. Laurel's expression darkened as she read. These are recent medical entries, she said. Vaccinations, health checks, all logged to Whitcomb's yacht, the Perigee. Last entry was 3 days ago. So much for his story about it being lost cargo, Nate said grimly. This cub didn't drift out there by accident, Laurel agreed. The location, the harness with flotation, it was placed there deliberately. But why? Whitcomb wanted to film a rescue, Nate said. He as much as told me so. Said it would make a great story. Of course. Laurel's voice was bitter. The great philanthropist, saving endangered animals at sea. Perfect publicity. Their eyes met, and Nate felt the old familiar tension. 2 years of silence stretched between them, full of unspoken words and regrets. You should have called me. Right away, Laurel said finally. Not waited until you were almost ashore. I knew how to handle it, Nate replied stiffly. That's always been your problem, hasn't it? Handling everything alone. She stood up, brushing off her knees. How did that work out for us? The words stung, but Nate couldn't argue. His tendency to shut people out, to shoulder burdens alone, had cost him his marriage. He watched Laurel move to check the cub again, her movements precise and controlled. This isn't just about publicity stunts, she said after a moment. staging fake rescues, endangering protected species. It's elaborate, expensive. Whitcomb must be hiding something bigger. Agreed, Nate said. The question is what? I can start checking records, see if there's a pattern. Laurel straightened up, but this cub needs proper care first. I'll take him to the wildlife center. I'm coming with you, Nate said quickly. Whitcomb knows I have the cub. If he tries anything, still trying to protect everyone. Laurel's voice was softer now, almost sad. Some things never change. Some things do, Nate replied quietly. I know I can't handle this alone. That's why I called you. Laurel studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but we do this by the book. No cowboy stunts. Yes, ma'am. Nate managed a small smile. Despite everything between them, working with Laurel still felt natural. Right. They had always made a good team. When he'd let them be one, Bernie helped them transfer the cub to Laurel's vehicle, carefully secured in a proper transport cage. As they worked, Nate couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whitcomb wasn't a man who accepted defeat easily. Whatever game he was playing, it was far from over. The screech of tires on gravel shattered the quiet morning. 2 police cruisers and a gleaming black SUV swept into the abandoned pier's lot, kicking up dust clouds. Nate's heart sank as he recognized Harlan Whitcomb stepping out of the SUV, followed by Sheriff Clint Raleigh's bulky frame. What's he doing here? Bernie muttered, moving closer to the cub's transport cage. Nothing good, Nate replied, positioning himself between the approaching men and Laurel, who was still securing the cage. Whitcomb's expensive shoes crunched on the shell-strewn path as he approached, a folder clutched in his manicured hands. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Captain Calder, he called out, I believe you have something that belongs to me. Sheriff Raleigh flanked him, thumbs hooked in his belt. 2 deputies spread out behind them, hands resting on their holstered weapons. The cub doesn't belong to anyone. Laurel stepped forward, her Federal Wildlife Service badge visible on her belt. I'm Dr. Laurel Fitch, and I'm taking custody of this endangered species. Whitcomb's smile didn't waver as he opened his folder. Actually, I have an emergency order here citing both quarantine regulations and maritime salvage rights. The animal was recovered in international waters, making this a salvage operation. Additionally, without proper documentation of its origin, it poses a potential health risk. He handed the papers to Sheriff Raleigh, who nodded importantly. These. Look in order, ma'am. We'll need to take custody of the animal. That's ridiculous, Laurel snapped, scanning the documents. Maritime salvage doesn't apply to living creatures, and I have full authority to quarantine the cub at our federal facilities. Your jurisdiction is in question here, Dr. Fitch. Whitcomb's voice hardened. The sheriff has local authority, and these orders come from the state level. We wouldn't want to create an unfortunate jurisdictional incident, would we? The deputies began moving forward, spreading out to flank the boat. Nate felt the situation slipping away. He knew Whitcomb's type, men who use money and influence to bend the law to their will. Even if Laurel was right, by the time they fought it out in court, the cub would be long gone. Last chance, Sheriff Raleigh said, his hand moving to his weapon. Hand over the animal, or we'll have to take it by force. Nate caught Bernie's eye and gave a slight nod. His faithful deckhand immediately understood, casually moving toward the boat's lines. The law is clear, Laurel was saying, her voice rising in frustration. You can't just... Now, Bernie! Nate shouted. In one smooth motion, he scooped up the transport cage while Bernie slashed through the dock lines with his rigging knife. Laurel, catching on quickly, leaped aboard as Nate passed her the cage. Stop them, Whitcomb shouted, but they were already moving. Nate gunned the engines, the powerful motors roaring to life. The boat shot backward, leaving a wall of spray in its wake. "This is your last warning." Sheriff Raleigh's voice boomed over a megaphone. "Stop your vessel immediately." But Nate was already turning the wheel hard, sending them racing down the narrow channel between the mangroves. Behind them, he could hear sirens starting up, but he knew these waters better than any of them. Within minutes, they disappeared into the maze of coastal waterways. "You realize we just became fugitives," Laurel said, still clutching the cage containing the remarkably calm cub. "Not exactly," Bernie offered, checking their heading. "They never officially served us with anything. More like we're temporarily unavailable." "Whitcomb's got the sheriff in his pocket," Nate said grimly, easing back on the throttle once he was sure they weren't being followed. "We couldn't let him take the cub. You saw those papers. They were just for show. Once he had the animal, it would have disappeared." Laurel nodded slowly. "You're right. But we need a plan. Whitcomb's power reaches far, and we can't stay on the run forever." "First things first," Nate replied, steering them into a hidden cove he often used during storm seasons. "We need to figure out what Whitcomb's really up to. This isn't just about publicity anymore. He was too desperate to get that cub back." As they idled in the protected waters, surrounded by overhanging trees, the gravity of their situation settled over them. They were now targets of both Whitcomb's considerable resources and local law enforcement. Whatever move they made next would have to be carefully considered. The cub stirred in its cage, letting out a small mewl. Despite everything, Nate couldn't help but feel they'd made the right choice. Sometimes standing up for what's right meant standing against the law, especially when the law itself had been corrupted. The abandoned dry dock loomed before them like a concrete fortress, its weathered walls offering welcome shelter from prying eyes. Nate guided the boat into the shadowy interior, where rusted chains and forgotten tools hung like silent witnesses to their predicament. The salt-stained walls rose 30 feet on either side, creating an echo chamber that amplified every sound. Bernie secured the boat with practiced efficiency, while Laurel tended to the cub. The tension between her and Nate crackled like static electricity, making the confined space feel even smaller. "We can't stay here indefinitely," Laurel said, her voice tight with frustration. "The cub needs proper care, proper facilities." "And walk right into Whitcomb's hands?" Nate shot back, pacing the narrow deck. "He's probably got people watching every veterinary clinic and wildlife center in 3 counties. Then, what's your brilliant plan? Hide out here until we all get arrested?" Bernie cleared his throat loudly. "How about we focus on keeping this little fellow comfortable for now?" He gestured to the cub, who was drinking water from a makeshift bowl. "Fighting amongst ourselves won't help anybody." Nate and Laurel exchanged glances, both recognizing the wisdom in Bernie's words. The old deckhand had always been their voice of reason, even back when they were married. "Bernie's right," Nate admitted, running a hand through his hair. "We need to work together on this." The sudden buzz of a cell phone made them all jump. Laurel pulled hers out, frowning at the unknown. "Number. Don't answer it," Nate warned. They could trace. A text message appeared. "I know where you are. I want to help. Selene Hardwick, Whitcomb Productions." "Whitcomb's PR producer?" Bernie whispered, peering at the screen. "Could be a trap." Another message followed. "Meeting. In person too risky. But you need to know, the cub you rescued wasn't the first, and won't be the last." Laurel's hands shook slightly as she typed back. "Prove you're really trying to help." The response came quickly. "Tomorrow morning, 0600 hours. Whitcomb has another rescue planned. Different cub, same script. Gulf coordinates. 28 degrees, 45 minutes north, 82 degrees, 30 minutes west. The perigee will be there with full camera crew. Check satellite tracking. You'll see I'm telling the truth." My God, Laurel breathed, looking up at Nate. He's running a whole operation. Bernie pulled up the maritime tracking website on his tablet. She's right. The perigy's already heading toward those coordinates. Nate felt sick to his stomach. This isn't just about publicity stunts. He's systematically staging these rescues, using real endangered animals like props in his twisted show. But why? Bernie asked. What's he getting out of it? Image, Laurel said grimly. Conservation awards, political influence, tax breaks for his shipping company. Every rescue makes him look like a hero, while his real business practices stay in the shadows. Another message appeared. There's more. Much more, but not safe to text. Watch tomorrow's coordinates. You'll see I'm telling the truth. Delete these messages. Can we trust her? Bernie asked, his weathered face creased with concern. We don't have much choice, Nate replied. But we'll be careful. If she's telling the truth about tomorrow's coordinates, it proves Whitcomb's running an industrial-scale deception. That's the evidence we need. Laurel stroked the cub's head through the cage bars. This isn't just about saving one animal anymore. It's about exposing a whole system of exploitation. And that's exactly why Whitcomb's fighting so hard to stop us, Nate added. We're not just threatening one publicity stunt, we're threatening his entire operation. Bernie nodded solemnly. Then we better make sure we get solid proof tomorrow, because a man like that won't go down without a fight. The cub made a soft purring sound, drawing their attention. In the dim light of the dry dock, its spotted coat seemed to shimmer, a reminder of everything at stake. They weren't just three people hiding in an abandoned building anymore. They were the front line in a battle against corruption, with innocent lives hanging in the balance. Laurel's phone buzzed one final time. Be careful. Whitcomb has eyes everywhere. We'll contact again when safe. Then the messages disappeared, leaving them alone with their newfound knowledge and the weight of responsibility it brought. The dry dock fell silent except for the gentle lapping of water against the hull and the occasional cry of a seabird outside. In the shadows, three unlikely allies sat watching over a rescued cub, knowing that tomorrow would bring them one step closer to either justice or disaster. The night grew thick around the abandoned dry dock, broken only by pale moonlight filtering through gaps in the corrugated metal walls. Nate checked his watch for the 100th time. 11:35. They'd need to move soon, but for now, the temporary shelter felt safer than being exposed on the water. Bernie had just finished securing the cub's cage when a metallic clang echoed through the building. Everyone froze. What was that? Laurel whispered, moving closer to the cub's cage. Nate held up his hand for silence, straining to listen. Years of Coast Guard training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every nerve was screaming danger. Another sound, the soft scrape of boots on concrete. Someone's here, he mouthed to Bernie, who nodded grimly and reached for. A boathook thought the attack came without warning. A dark figure vaulted over a stack of crates, the moonlight glinting off the blade in his hand. Nate recognized Cole Bannister's scarred face just before the enforcer slammed into him, driving them both backward. Nobody move. Cole barked, pressing the knife against Nate's throat. Or the captain here gets it. In his other hand, he held up a small black device, radio jammers active. No calling for help. Bernie started forward, but Cole pressed the blade harder. Stay back, old man. Whitcomb just wants what's his. The cub isn't his, Laurel said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. Cole laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Lady, you don't know half of what belongs to Whitcomb. Now everyone's going to stay nice and quiet while I... Bernie chose that moment to act, swinging the boat hook in a wide arc. Cole ducked, releasing his hold on Nate, but the movement sent all three men stumbling on the slick timbers. Bernie lost his balance, crashing hard against a support beam before pitching toward the water below. "Bernie!" Nate lunged, grabbing his friend's arm just as Cole recovered and charged. The next few seconds were chaos. Bernie dangled precariously over the drop, his weight threatening to pull Nate over too. Cole slashed with the knife, catching Nate's jacket. The blade tore fabric but missed flesh. Nate's mind raced. He couldn't let go of Bernie. Couldn't fight Cole effectively. Couldn't. Then his eyes landed on the rescue throw bag clipped to his belt. A crazy idea formed. "Laurel," he shouted. "When I say now, grab Bernie." She moved into position as Nate released the throw bag with his free hand. In one fluid motion, muscle memory from hundreds of training exercises, he whipped the weighted rope in a perfect arc around Cole's legs. "Now," Laurel grabbed Bernie's arm, giving Nate the split second he needed. He yanked the rope hard, sending Cole crashing onto the timbers. The enforcer's knife went skittering into the shadows. Bernie scrambled to safety with Laurel's help, while Nate quickly wrapped the rope around Cole's thrashing form, securing him to a support beam. "Coast Guard knots," Nate said grimly. "Good luck getting out of those." "You're dead," Cole spat, struggling against the bonds. "All of you. Whitcomb will what?" Nate got right in his face. "Send more thugs? Stage more fake rescues? Tell me, Cole, how many animals has he used? How many lives has he put at risk for his publicity stunts?" But Cole just smiled, blood trickling from a split lip. "You have no idea what you're up against, Calder. No idea at all." Bernie groaned, clutching his side where he'd hit the beam. "We need to move. He won't be alone." Nate knew he was right. Already, distant voices could be heard outside the dry dock. Working quickly, they gathered their essential gear and the Cub's cage. Laurel helped Bernie while Nate did a final check of their escape route. "What about him?" Laurel nodded toward Cole. "Someone will find him," Nate said. "But we'll be long gone by then." They slipped out through a rear maintenance door just as flashlight beams began sweeping the main entrance. The night air carried the sound of approaching vehicles. That was too close. Bernie wheezed as they made their way to where they'd hidden the boat. "You okay?" Nate asked, noting how his friend favored his left side. "Just bruised. Nothing broken." But they all knew the stakes had changed. What had started as a battle of wits and legal maneuvering had escalated into physical violence. Whitcomb wasn't just trying to intimidate them anymore. He was trying to eliminate them. The Cub made a soft mewling sound from its cage as they carefully loaded it aboard. Looking at the innocent creature, Nate felt a surge of determination. If Whitcomb was willing to send armed men after them, what else was he capable of? What other secrets was he trying to protect? They cast off silently, disappearing into the darkness of the channel. Behind them, angry shouts echoed from the dry dock as Cole was discovered. But Nate kept his eyes forward, knowing they'd crossed a line tonight. There was no going back now. In the dim light of Bernie's laptop screen, the footage started playing. Nate, Laurel, and Bernie huddled together in the cramped cabin of the boat, watching intently as Selini's secret recording unfolded before them. The video showed Harlan Whitcomb on the deck of the Perigee, practicing lines in front of a camera. "When I saw that poor creature struggling in the waves, I knew I had to act," he declared with perfectly rehearsed emotion. "Cut," called a voice off screen. "Let's try it again, Mr. Whitcomb. More concern in your voice this time." Laurel's hand tightened on Nate's arm. "Look at this next part," she whispered. The footage shifted to below deck, where handlers wearing rubber gloves were working over a metal tub. A young leopard cub, different from the one they'd rescued, thrashed weakly as the men dipped it in. Some kind of solution. "They're dyeing its fur," Bernie muttered in disgust, making it match the story they want to tell. Another clip showed a drone operator reviewing flight paths with Whitcomb. "We'll sweep in from the northeast," the operator explained, pointing to a tablet. "Get the sun behind you for that golden hero shot. The viewers will eat it up." Nate felt sick watching the calculated manipulation. He's turned animal endangerment into a marketing campaign. "Wait for it," Laurel said grimly. The final segment showed Whitcomb in his office, speaking to a room full of PR executives. Behind him, a presentation displayed upcoming media events and promotional materials. "The Rescue series launches next month," Whitcomb announced proudly. 5 dramatic saves, each one building to the Foundation's major fundraising gala. The network's already committed to primetime coverage. He smiled, spreading his arms wide. Who doesn't love a hero? The video ended, leaving them in stunned silence. Bernie was the first to speak. "That lying snake. He's planning to do this again and again." "Not if we stop him," Laurel said. She pulled out her phone, showing them an email. "I sent the footage to my contacts at Fish and Wildlife. They fast-tracked the sealed federal warrant for fraud and endangered species violations. We just need to catch him in the act." Nate stood up, pacing the small space as his mind raced. "He's careful, professional, everything scripted and controlled." He paused, an idea forming. "But what if we force him off script? What are you thinking?" Laurel asked. "His ego's his weak spot. You saw how he performs for the cameras. He loves playing the hero. If we can bait him into a confrontation where he thinks he's in control." Nate trailed off, looking at Bernie. "How many of those micro cameras did your cousin loan us?" Bernie grinned. 4. High def, wireless, smaller than a quarter. "Good. Hide them all over the boat." "Perfect." Nate turned to Laurel. "We get everything on video, not his staged version, but the real Whitcomb. Once he starts gloating, thinking he's won, we expose everything," Laurel finished. "The staged rescues, the animal abuse, all of it." They spent the next hour planning, mapping out camera positions and likely scenarios. Bernie worked on concealing the tiny lenses while Laurel coordinated with federal agents. Nate studied the local charts, identifying the perfect spot for their trap. "There's one thing still bothering me," Bernie said as he tested the camera feeds. "How do we know Whitcomb will show up himself? He might just send more guys like Cole." "Because I'm going to challenge him directly," Nate replied. "Make it personal. His reputation means everything. He won't be able to resist defending it himself." Laurel looked up from her phone. "The warrant's confirmed. We'll have backup nearby, but they'll stay out of sight unless things go bad." Nate nodded, feeling the weight of what they were attempting. This wasn't just about one cub anymore. It was about exposing a system of exploitation and lies that Whitcomb had carefully built. The thought should have been overwhelming, but instead, Nate felt focused, determined. He caught Laurel watching him with an unreadable expression. "What? Just remembering something," she said softly. "You always were at your best when fighting for something bigger than yourself." The comment hit home, reminding Nate of all they'd lost, and maybe what they might find again. But before he could respond, Bernie called them over. "Cameras are ready," he announced, switching between feeds on his laptop. "Got the whole boat covered, even that blind spot near the stern." Nate studied the images, impressed by the coverage. Combined with their audio recording setup, they'd capture everything. Now they just had to make Whitcomb reveal his true nature. "Tomorrow, then?" Nate said, looking at his companions. "We set the trap and wait for our hero to arrive." Bernie and Laurel nodded, their faces showing the same mix of anxiety and resolve that Nate felt. The evidence was undeniable. The plan was set, and their roles were clear. All that remained was to execute it perfectly. Outside the cabin, waves lapped gently against the hull while the rescued cub slept peacefully in its cage. Dawn was still hours away, but Nate knew none of them would sleep much tonight. Too much hung in the balance. Too much could go wrong, but for the first time since this started, they had more than just suspicions and theories. They had proof. And tomorrow, they'd use that proof to bring Harlan Whitcomb's carefully constructed world crashing down. The first rays of sunlight painted the horizon in soft oranges and pinks as Nate stood at the helm of his boat. His hand hovered over the radio mic, heart pounding. Everything hinged on this moment. "Paraji, this is the Sweet Liberty. Come in, Whitcomb." Nate's voice was steady despite his nerves. There was a crackle of static, then Whitcomb's smooth voice filled the cabin. "Well, if it isn't our fugitive captain, ready to be reasonable, I have a proposition. Meet me at Morgan's Point. Just you. We can resolve this properly." A pause. "And why should I trust you?" "Because I'm offering what you want. The Cub, properly documented on camera, but we do this right. Legal sanctuary, accredited care. Everything above board." Bernie gave a thumbs up from his position at the laptop, confirming the hidden cameras were recording. Laurel stood near the Cub's cage, warrant in hand, her expression tense but determined. "Very well," Whitcomb replied. 1 hour. As they waited at the designated spot, Nate checked their preparations one final time. The cameras were perfectly concealed, one in the compass housing, another beneath the radio panel, 2 more covering different angles of the deck. Every word would be captured. The perigee appeared right on schedule, its white hull gleaming in the morning sun. Whitcomb stood at the bow, immaculately dressed in sailing whites, his camera crew positioned behind him. Everything about his stance screamed confidence. "Bring her alongside," Nate called out, guiding his boat into position. As the vessels drew parallel, Whitcomb stepped aboard with practiced ease, followed by 2 crew members with cameras. "I must say, you've led us on quite a chase," Whitcomb said, straightening his jacket. "But I'm glad we can end this sensibly. The Cub?" "Below deck," Nate replied. "But first, let's talk about your rescue operation." Whitcomb's smile never wavered. A noble cause. Saving endangered animals, raising awareness. The public loves a mouse. Good rescue story, especially when it's staged. Laurel emerged from the cabin, her federal credentials visible. "Dr. Fitch." Whitcomb nodded politely. "Still pursuing baseless accusations?" "We know about the dye jobs, the rehearsals, the planted cubs," Nate said. "Your PR producer showed us everything." A flash of anger crossed Whitcomb's face before his. Smooth mask returned. "Sometimes we have to streamline events. Get past the red tape. Do you know how long proper permits take? Meanwhile, animals suffer. So you fake rescues instead?" Laurel pressed. "I create opportunities," Whitcomb declared, warming to his subject. "The public needs heroes, needs to believe in something. My foundation raises millions for conservation. If I have to orchestrate a few dramatic moments to make that happen, who's really being harmed?" "The animals you exploit," Laurel shot back. "The laws you break," Whitcomb laughed. "Laws? I've got half the state's politicians in my pocket." "Why? Do you think your local sheriff was so cooperative?" "Because you're really good at managing optics," Nate said. "Until now." Laurel held up her phone, playing back Whitcomb's own words from moments ago. His face darkened as he realized. "You've been recording, along with several other cameras," Nate confirmed. "And this?" Laurel produced the federal warrant. "For fraud, endangered species violations, and criminal conspiracy." For a moment, genuine fear flashed across Whitcomb's face. Then his expression hardened into something dangerous. "Impressive," he said softly. "But you forget who you're dealing with." He gestured to his camera crew. "Johnson Meyer, make sure you get this next part clearly." The cameramen raised their equipment, but instead of pointing at Whitcomb, they aimed directly at Nate and Laurel. "I'm About to document two desperate fugitives threatening a respected philanthropist, Whitcomb announced. After stealing an endangered animal and attempting extortion, they became violent when confronted. Tragic, really, how these things escalate. Bernie emerged from below deck. Boss, we've got company. 3 boats approaching fast. Nate's stomach dropped as he spotted the vessels, sleek, powerful boats cutting through the water toward them. He recognized the lead craft as belonging to Sheriff Raleigh. Did you really think I'd come alone? Whitcomb smiled. Now then, about. That cub. The morning sun climbed higher, its warmth doing nothing to dispel the chill that had settled over the Sweet Liberty's deck. What had seemed like certain victory moments ago now balanced on a knife's edge, with Whitcomb once again holding the power to shape the narrative. Your move, Captain Calder, Whitcomb said smoothly. Though I suggest you choose quickly. Those boats will be here in about 5 minutes. Without warning, the Perigy's engines roared to life. Whitcomb lunged for his boat as its bow swung hard. Toward the Sweet Liberty. Metal screamed against metal as the larger vessel's reinforced hull tore into Nate's boat with devastating force. The impact sent everyone stumbling. Camera equipment crashed to the deck. Above them, the sky had turned. An ominous dark gray and fat raindrops began pelting the boats. Within seconds, the squall hit full force, sheets of rain reducing visibility to mere feet. The hulls breached. Bernie shouted from below, taking on water. The Sweet Liberty's engines sputtered and coughed as seawater flooded the mechanical spaces. Waves grew higher, tossing both vessels like toys. Through the curtain of rain, Nate spotted a dark figure leaping across the gap between boats. Cole Bannister, knife glinting in his hand. The enforcer moved with brutal efficiency. He slashed through the main fuel line, sending diesel spraying across the deck. Then he grabbed Laurel, dragging her toward the rail despite her fierce struggles. Stop! Celine appeared from behind the cabin, wielding a boat hook. This has gone too far. Cole spun, backhanding Celine with his free hand. She stumbled backward, hit the rail, and toppled overboard with a splash. At the same moment, the Cub's cage slid across the tilting deck as another wave struck. Time seemed to freeze as Nate faced an impossible choice. Whitcomb's boat was pulling, away with their primary evidence. Cole still had Laurel, but she was fighting back hard. Celine thrashed in the churning water, and the Cub's cage teetered at the edge of going over. His Coast Guard training took over. Bernie, get Laurel. Nate dove into the storm-tossed sea, powerful strokes carrying him to where Celine struggled against the waves. He reached her just as she began to go under, wrapping an arm around her chest and pulling her to the surface. The Cub, she gasped, pointing out the cage had indeed fallen overboard, but its buoyant elements kept it partially afloat. Nate towed Celine to the nearest handhold on his boat's hull, then swam for the cage. The Leopard Cub yowled in terror as water sloshed through the bars. Fighting exhaustion, Nate grabbed the cage's handle with his free hand. The waterproof pack, containing their main camera and hard drives, had torn loose in the chaos, already disappearing into the depths. But he couldn't spare a thought for lost evidence, not with lives at stake. Back aboard the Sweet Liberty, Bernie had managed to knock Cole off balance with a tackle. Laurel broke free, immediately grabbing a life ring to help haul Nate's Celine, and the Cub back aboard. The rain continued to pour as they sprawled on the deck, gasping for breath. The recording gear, Laurel said between pants. Tell me we didn't lose it all. Nate shook his head grimly, watching Whitcomb's yacht disappear into the storm. The primary evidence was gone, sunk to the bottom of the Gulf. But he knew he'd made the only choice he could live with. Through the driving rain, he saw Celine hugging herself, shivering but alive. The Cub, though soaked, still fought with spirit in its cage. And Laurel, She met his eyes with a look of understanding. She knew why he'd chosen as he had. Some victories weren't measured in evidence or arrests. Sometimes winning meant simply keeping everyone alive to fight another day. The Sweet Liberty's deck tilted more severely as water continued flooding her hull. They needed to abandon ship soon. But Nate felt a strange sense of peace despite their setback. He'd faced the test of his character and hadn't hesitated to put lives before victory. Cole had vanished in the chaos, likely swimming to one of Raleigh's approaching boats. The sheriff's vessels were still closing in through the squall. Their situation remained desperate. But they were alive together, and not done fighting yet. The Sweet Liberty's deck pitched sharply as more water flooded her hull. Rain hammered down in sheets, but through the deluge, Nate could still make out the sleek form of Whitcomb's yacht powering away. His jaw tightened. They weren't finished, not by a long shot. "Bernie, get the emergency flares," Nate shouted, over the storm's roar. His old friend didn't hesitate, diving into the cabin and emerging with their emergency kit. Nate's hands were steady as he loaded the flare gun. The bright red cylinder felt warm against his rain-chilled skin. He tracked the Paragee's movement through the squall, calculating angle and wind. "You'll only get one shot," Laurel said beside him, her voice carrying certainty rather than doubt. The flare arced through the rain like a comet, trailing sparks as it blazed across the Paragee's bow. Whitcomb's yacht had to veer hard to starboard to avoid it, bringing her parallel to the failing Sweet Liberty. Now, Nate grabbed a grappling hook from the emergency gear. The weighted line spun out, catching on the Paragee's rail with a solid clang. He quickly secured his end to a cleat. "Be careful," Laurel gripped his arm. "He's desperate now." Nate nodded, then began pulling himself along the line through the space between vessels. Waves crashed beneath him as he dangled over the churning gulf. The rain made the rope slippery, but his years of rescue training held true. Hand over hand, he closed the distance. He had just swung his legs over the Paragee's rail when Whitcomb emerged from the cabin, wielding a spear gun. The shipping magnate's perfectly styled hair was plastered to his head, his expensive suit soaked through, but his eyes blazed with fury. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" Whitcomb snarled, leveling the weapon. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing." Nate kept his voice steady, analyzing angles and distances. The deck was slick with rain. Whitcomb's stance was rigid, unbalanced. "I built everything I have," Whitcomb ranted, jabbing the spear gun for emphasis. "Who are you to tear it down? Some washed-up rescue swimmer? A charter captain living hand? To mouth? I'm someone who knows right from wrong," Nate replied. "Something your money made you forget." Whitcomb's finger tightened on the trigger, but Nate was already moving. He dropped and rolled as the spear whooshed overhead. In the same motion, he swept his leg out, catching Whitcomb's ankles. The yacht's owner stumbled on the wet deck. Nate surged up, tackling Whitcomb before he could recover. They grappled across the deck, rain pelting them both. Whitcomb fought with the desperate strength of a man seeing his empire crumble, but Nate had years of rescue experience in rough waters. A powerful wave rolled the yacht. Nate used the momentum to flip Whitcomb onto his stomach, twisting the man's arms behind his back. The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the storm's fury. "That'll be the Coast Guard," Nate said, maintaining his hold as Whitcomb struggled. "Turns out Cellini called them before your man knocked her overboard." "They have nothing on me," Whitcomb spat, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Actually," Cellini's voice carried across from the Sweet Liberty. She held up a waterproof case. "I always keep backups. Every staged rescue, every bribed official, every fake permit. It's all here." The helicopters emerged from the rain like avenging angels, spotlights cutting through the gloom. The rotors whipped the rain into a frenzy as they held position over both vessels. Coast Guard rescue swimmers dropped into the water, quickly boarding both boats. They secured Whitcomb as Nate released him, then helped evacuate everyone from the sinking Sweet Liberty. "You've destroyed me," Whitcomb said as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Nate shook his head. "No, you did that yourself, the moment you decided your reputation was worth more than the truth." The rain began to ease as federal officers swarmed the perigee. Nate watched as they led Whitcomb and his crew away. Selene handed over her evidence drive, then gave her official statement about the staged rescues and cover dash-ups. Sheriff Raleigh's boats arrived just in time to witness Whitcomb's arrest. The local lawman's face turned ashen as federal agents boarded his vessels, armed with warrants about his involvement in the scheme. Standing at the perigee's rail, Nate felt Laurel's presence beside him. They watched together as Coast Guard crews secured the scene. The Leopard Cub, safely contained, would finally get proper care at a legitimate sanctuary. "Not bad for a washed-up rescue swimmer," Laurel said, bumping his shoulder with hers. "Couldn't have done it without you," Nate replied. "Any of you." He looked at Bernie and Selene, who had joined them at the rail. The Sweet Liberty's bow slipped beneath the waves, but Nate felt no remorse. She had served her purpose, helping them bring down a corrupt empire built on lies and exploitation. Some sacrifices were worth the cost. The sunset painted the pier in soft orange and pink hues, a stark contrast to the dark storm clouds retreating on the horizon. Nate leaned against a weathered piling, his clothes still damp, but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. The federal agents had just finished loading the last of their equipment, and the pier was finally clearing out. Bernie sat nearby on an overturned crate, his arm freshly bandaged. Despite his injuries, he wore a satisfied grin. "Never thought I'd see the day Whitcomb got led away in cuffs," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "The evidence was overwhelming," Laurel added, walking over with a steaming cup of coffee from the pier's small shop. "The federal prosecutors are confident his empire won't survive this." The Leopard Cub, safely contained in a proper transport carrier, made soft sounds as wildlife officers prepared it for the journey to a certified big cat sanctuary in Tennessee. Nate watched the careful, professional handling with approval. This was how things should be done. No cameras, no publicity stunts, just dedicated people doing the right thing. "They said we can follow them up to the sanctuary if we want," Laurel mentioned, her voice careful, neutral. "Make sure the little one gets settled in properly." Nate nodded, then fell quiet, wrestling with thoughts that had been building throughout this whole adventure. The setting sun cast long shadows across the pier, and in them he saw his own patterns, always fighting alone, pushing away those who tried to help, convinced he had to carry every burden by himself. "You know," he said finally, turning to face Laurel, "I've been thinking about what went wrong between us." She raised an eyebrow but waited patiently for him to continue. "I always thought I was protecting you by handling things myself, keeping my problems, my fights, my struggles separate." He gestured at the scene around them. The federal agents, the wildlife officers, Bernie, Selene talking to investigators. "But look at what we accomplished together. We took down Whitcomb because we worked as a team, because I didn't try to go it alone." Bernie suddenly found something very interesting to examine on the far side of the pier, giving them privacy. Laurel set her coffee down on a nearby post, her eyes never leaving Nate's face. "The whole time we were married," Nate continued, his voice rough with emotion, "I thought being strong meant being solitary. I was wrong. Real strength is knowing when to let others in, when to fight together." The last rays of sunlight caught the moisture in Laurel's eyes. "That's all I ever wanted," she said softly. "Not for you to be perfect, just for you to let me be part of your life, all of it. not just the easy parts. Nate took a deep breath, then reached for her hand. "Come with me," he said, "to the sanctuary, and, after, we could start over. Do it right this time." His heart hammered in his chest as he added, "I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm asking you to walk with me while I learn to be better." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Are you sure?" "Because last time we tried this, last time I was too stubborn to change," he interrupted. "Too set in my ways. But this whole thing with the cub, with Whitcomb, it showed me something. Miracles don't just happen. Sometimes they need help. Sometimes they need us to be brave enough to change." Laurel stepped closer, squeezing his hand. "You know it won't be easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," he replied, then grinned. "Besides, after taking down a corrupt shipping magnate and saving a leopard cub, how hard can it be?" She laughed, the sound bright and clear in the evening air. "Okay," she said. "Yes, let's try again." From his spot by the crate, Bernie let out a whoop that made several agents turn their heads. "About time," he called out, not even pretending he hadn't been listening. The wildlife officers began loading the cub's carrier into their transport vehicle. Nate and Laurel watched together, their shoulders touching, hands still linked. The little cat that had brought them back together peered out through the carrier's door, its eyes bright and curious about the future ahead. "You know," Laurel said thoughtfully, "they say leopards can't change their spots." "Maybe not," Nate agreed, "but people can change their hearts, if they want it badly enough." The transport vehicle's engine rumbled to life. Nate and Laurel walked toward Laurel's truck, ready to follow the cub to its new home. Behind them, Bernie called out that he'd watch the pier until they returned. The evening wrapped around them like a gentle embrace, full of promise and possibility. Thank you for watching. If even one moment stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow with another story that speaks to the heart.